we live with risk every day. We assess risk. We assess that that $155 million is low risk and is not affecting our preparedness whatsoever for Dorian.
I'm really disappointed that President Trump has proposed taking money from FEMA for walls or cages or militarization of the border.
Any potential transfers will not impact our ability to respond to this storm or any other storms in the rest of the hurricane season.
So there's some of the back and forth after the administration decided to take some FEMA disaster relief money and help secure the border. With that, let's bring in our panel. Jeff Mason, White House correspondent for Reuters, Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist, and Susan Friccio, chief congressional correspondent for The Washington Examiner. Susan, let's start with you. Big deal to shift this money?
It's really a drop in the bucket when it comes to disaster relief funding. There's several $1 billion in that fund, so this is just a tiny amount. FEMA has also already allocated its supplies to disaster relief centers for the season, so all that is already taken care of. This isn't going to, unless, say the hurricane curves in and causes some kind of unimaginable catastrophe that's so far not forecast, there's just really no way that this is going to impact their operations right now.
Molly.
I think it's also important that people focus on what's happening at the state level. Frequently, when you have disasters of this nature, what's happening at the state level has more to do with the success of a group of people making it through the storm. To that end, Florida really should be commended for, and I know they have a lot of experience handling this, but reports coming out of there show such a great work on communication, preparing, planning, and hopefully that will continue. If by chance the response is slow, Jeff, this would be something they will point at, their critics at least, about shifting this money, right? Sure. I mean, there's so much of what happens in Washington is about optics. This is not a great optic, and it's one that Democrats are seizing on. And for sure, if the response ends up not being as good as they've said it could be or would be, then I imagine the Democrats would focus on that more. Okay, topic number 2, a mass shooting in Odessa, Texas over the weekend. Full disclosure, my first reporting job was in Midland, Odessa, Texas, so my hearts go out to those good folks there. Take a listen to this.
I've been speaking to a lot of senators. We've been speaking to a lot of House members, a lot of Republicans, a lot of Democrats, and people want to do something. So we're going to see. This really hasn't changed anything. We're doing a package, and we'll see how it comes about. It's happy talk and this promise that we're going to do something. We're going to look at it, but they never actually do it.
Susan, what are you hearing from your sources on the Hill in terms of discussions about some kind of legislative package? Yeah, there is some enthusiasm to try to put something together. You heard Mitch McConnell say earlier in August that we're going to focus on some kind of background check legislation, potentially red flag laws. So all eyes really will be on the Senate, because if you can find a compromise there, because that would be bipartisan because of the filibuster rule, that might lead the way in terms of what Congress can get done. However, it's going to require cooperation, not just from Democrats in the Senate, but in the House, where they tend to be more progressive, and they may push for far more liberal gun control kind of measures than they might want to see in the Senate. So it's going to be a real uphill climb, but I think the action will first focus on the Senate. Molly, are there some common sense things they can do? What about mental health also? Violent video games? Anything that both sides can agree on? This is one of the problems, I think, with these immediate reactions to these horrible instances of murder is people just want to do something, and they want to do something even if it would do nothing to prevent such tragedies. Unfortunately, even as you see other issues of violence on decline or serial murders on decline, mass shootings are increasing, and it's a very complicated thing as to why. Everything from everything from the presence of guns to mental health issues to even how the media cover it. And I think this is something that without in any way restricting First Amendment freedoms at all, the media need to think about whether they are helping create something of a social contagion with some of these things and think about how to cover them. Jeff, administration officials believe they're going to get something done? Well, they say they do, and they are working on something. Whether or not that something ends up being as advanced or as strong as a lot of progressive Democrats are hoping for is an open question. I think the other open question is, what do they actually do on background checks? The president has wavered a little bit on how strongly he'd like to see advanced and broader background checks brought in under pressure from the NRA, but there's certainly pressure from the other side, the Democrats and progressives, to do more there. So you have preparations for a massive hurricane, you have a terrible mass shooting in Texas, and then you've got new measures going into place yesterday related to China on trade issues. Take a listen to this, and I will get you guys to weigh in. We
We are talking to China. The meeting is still on, as you know, in September. That hasn't changed. They haven't changed it. We haven't. We'll see what happens. But we can't allow China to rip us off anymore as a country.
So while this may not be Republican orthodoxy, there are a lot of people on both sides who say we should not allow China to be ripping the United States off.
Well, Trump is in this rare occurrence here where people really do support him on both sides of the aisle on China. He's got Minority Leader Chuck Schumer very vocally supporting him on this issue, saying don't give up, don't relent. And part of the reason is that China's unfair trade practices have, led to $50 billion a year in intellectual property theft. I think the trade deficit was somewhere around $400 billion in 2018. So it's a huge problem, and it's getting worse every year. And now the president says, I'm going to tackle it, and I'm not going to back down. It's causing a lot of strain and problems here in the United States. But I think economists agree that ultimately China is the one who suffers most from this trade war. So there's the running theory that they are going to bend first. But so far, they're not.
I think a lot of Republicans on the ballot next year and the president's allies are worried about an economic impact. Molly, your thoughts on this?
They're right to be worried about economic impacts. You conduct trade wars like this when you are in a healthy economic situation, and so it's the right time to do it, but it does come at a pretty serious cost, and China wants to, it seems like, wait out this presidency. I think people need to start thinking through, though, just how different the situation is from other situations we've had. When we were in a Cold War with the Soviet Union, we didn't see high levels of trade there. There was a general understanding that working with the communists did not mean that we would trade with them. As China, which is a communist country controlled by the Communist Party, they run their military, they run their economy, they might see that the U.S. and other countries aren't as interested in working with them, that India, for whatever else its faults are, is a functioning democracy that can handle factories, and you might see some kind of transition here. It might be a complete reordering of things and a separation of these economies.
Jeff, briefly, do your sources think they'll get a deal?
Well, I don't think there's going to be a deal anytime soon from my sources. The big question right now in the short term is when will they hold talks again? Both sides have said they want to meet in September, but they haven't come up with a date, and we're in September.
This is September.
Yes.
Panel, thank you very much.